I'm a 30-year-old guy, and I guess you could say my family dynamics have always been complicated. My younger sister, Emily, who's 28, has been the golden child for as long as I can remember. If you've ever seen one of those sitcoms where one sibling gets all the attention and the other fades into the background, well, that's my life, but without the laugh track. Growing up, it felt like Emily could do no wrong. I'd bring home A's on my report card, and the most I'd get was a quick good job before the conversation shifted to Emily's latest achievement. One time, she entered a middle school art contest and got an honorable mention. My parents acted like she had just won a Nobel Prize. Meanwhile, I had placed in a state-level science competition that same year, and it barely earned a footnote at dinner. That's just how it was. It wasn't just academics. Emily got the better birthday parties, more extravagant gifts, and way more slack for bad behavior. There was one Christmas when I got a couple of books and a sweater. Emily? She got a brand new phone and a shopping spree. My parents shrugged it off when I pointed out the difference, saying it's just because she really needed those things. Sure. As we got older, the gap between us only widened. I worked part-time through high school and college to help pay for my own expenses. At one point, I even picked up extra shifts to help with Emily's tuition because my parents claimed they were tight on money. Emily, on the other hand, never worked a day in her life until after college. My parents covered everything for her, from her rent to her shopping habits. It was as if the world revolved around keeping her happy and comfortable. For a long time, I tried to ignore the resentment that built up. I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over. That's just how families are, I'd think. I wanted to believe that if I worked hard, kept my head down, and stayed polite, things would eventually even out. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The breaking point came a couple of months ago. It was at a family gathering, one of those big ones where relatives you barely recognize come out of the woodwork. I had just gotten a promotion at work, something I was really proud of. It felt like a step forward in my career, something worth celebrating. But before I could even finish talking about it, Emily cut in with a snide comment about how my job wasn't real work. She made some crack about how I was basically just playing on a computer all day. The room went silent, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. For the first time, though, someone else spoke up. A family friend who was there, let's call her Linda, jumped in and said, "Actually, what Op does is really impressive. Not everyone could handle a job like that." It was the first time I'd ever seen my parents look uncomfortable about how Emily acted. Of course, they didn't say anything to defend me. Still, it was a small victory, even if it didn't feel like one at the time. After that, I started noticing just how much support I got from people outside the family. Friends, coworkers, even distant relatives would congratulate me on my accomplishments. Meanwhile, within my own family, it felt like I was always walking in Emily's shadow. My partner, Travis, has been my biggest cheerleader through all of this. He's the one who kept reminding me that I didn't have to tolerate being constantly overshadowed. It was Travis who first suggested that maybe it was time to start setting some boundaries. Things escalated when I learned that Emily had been talking behind my back to mutual acquaintances. She'd been downplaying my achievements, calling them lucky breaks or not that impressive. I couldn't figure out why she'd go out of her way to do that. Wasn't being the favorite enough for her? Did she really need to tear me down to feel better about herself? Despite all this, I've managed to hit some major milestones recently. Aside from my promotion, Travis and I just got engaged, which has been a huge source of joy. But even that felt tainted by my family's reaction. When I told my parents, their first response wasn't excitement or congratulations. Instead, they asked, "So have you told Emily yet?" It was as if her feelings about my engagement were somehow more important than my own. The final straw came when I decided not to invite Emily to a significant event Travis and I were planning. I knew it would upset my parents, but I didn't care anymore. Sure enough, they accused me of being petty and causing drama. It's funny though, whenever Emily's antics caused problems, they'd brush it off as just how she is. I don't know where things will go from here, but for the first time, I'm done bending over backward to keep the peace. I can feel the shift happening, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a much bigger storm. Update 1. The fallout from my decision not to invite Emily to a key event was immediate and, honestly, more dramatic than I anticipated. My parents wasted no time making their opinions known. They called me the next morning, accusing me of being petty and trying to divide the family. According to them, Emily had done nothing wrong and deserved to be included. They didn't seem to care about all the times she'd disrespected me, belittled my career, or tried to overshadow every accomplishment I'd worked for. To them, it was my responsibility to keep the peace, as always. Not long after, Emily took her grievance public. She started posting these vague but obvious digs on social media. Things like, some people will go to any lengths to ruin a family just because they're jealous, and it's funny how success doesn't teach people basic kindness. She didn't name me directly, but anyone who knew us could connect the dots. Friends started reaching out, asking if everything was okay. A few even sent screenshots, which only added fuel to the fire. But something surprising happened. Mutual friends, people I hadn't talked to in ages, started messaging me privately. They shared stories of their own run-ins with Emily, talking about how she'd been manipulative, dismissive, or outright cruel to them in the past. It was shocking to realize just how many people had dealt with the same behavior I had, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't imagining things. A few days later, my parents invited Travis and me over for dinner, framing it as a way to clear the air. I should have known it wouldn't go well. The moment we walked in, it was clear they weren't interested in understanding my perspective. They launched into a speech about how I was overreacting and misremembering things. According to them, Emily wasn't favored, she just needed more support growing up. They even brought up examples from years ago, twisting them to make it seem like I'd been treated just as well as her. It felt like they were rewriting history. Travis, bless him, didn't let them steamroll me. He calmly pointed out how unfair it was for them to dismiss my feelings and reminded them of some of the sacrifices I'd made for Emily over the years. My parents didn't take kindly to that. They accused Travis of meddling in family matters and claimed he didn't understand the full picture. It was clear they were doubling down on their narrative. Meanwhile, Emily wasn't sitting quietly. Word got back to me that she was spreading rumors about me within the extended family. She claimed I was bitter and insecure, going as far as to tell people that I'd been struggling in my career and lashing out at her because of it. The irony was almost laughable, considering I'd just gotten promoted, but the rumors caused enough confusion that I had to start fielding awkward calls from aunts and cousins, trying to explain what was actually going on. The wedding planning became the next battleground. Somehow, Emily found out who a few of our vendors were and started reaching out to them directly. She wasn't blatant about it, she'd frame it as wanting to help or double-check details, but it caused enough chaos that we had to issue a blanket warning to everyone we were working with not to communicate with anyone but Travis or me. It was exhausting. Despite all this, there was a silver lining. Some extended family members, particularly a couple of my cousins, began reaching out to offer support. They shared their own experiences with my parents' favoritism and how it had affected their relationships with the family. One of my cousins even admitted they'd distanced themselves from family events because they couldn't handle how my parents treated Emily like royalty. It was validating to know I wasn't alone in feeling this way. Around this time, work became a sanctuary. I received an industry award for a project I'd spearheaded, which was a huge deal for me. But of course, when the news got back to Emily, she dismissed it as just a lucky break. I couldn't even muster the energy to care what she thought anymore. It was becoming clearer that her issues with me ran deeper than anything I could fix. The family drama reached a boiling point when my parents called a family meeting to resolve the conflict. I almost didn't go, but Travis convinced me to hear them out one last time. It was a disaster. Instead of addressing the real issues, it turned into yet another attack on me for tearing the family apart. My parents even tried to guilt me by saying they were stressed and worried about how this was affecting Emily. Not once did they acknowledge my feelings or the impact this had on me. That was the last straw. I told them I needed space and that I'd be limiting contact for the foreseeable future. Emily, too. I couldn't keep putting myself in situations where I felt disrespected and undermined. It wasn't an easy decision, but the relief I felt afterward was immediate. In the weeks that followed, I leaned heavily on Travis, my friends, and even his family. They offered the kind of support and validation I'd never felt growing up. Cutting ties with my family, at least partially, felt like taking the first real step toward prioritizing my own well-being. For now, that's where things stand, and for the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. Update 2. Not long after I decided to go low contact with Emily and my parents, news about Emily started making the rounds within the family. A cousin reached out, almost gleefully, to let me know Emily had gotten in trouble at work. Apparently, she had a meltdown during a team meeting, and it escalated to the point where HR had to get involved. The details were vague, but the gist was clear. Emily's entitled attitude had finally caught up with her. Rumors swirled that she might even lose her job, though nothing was confirmed yet. A week later, my parents called me. Their tone was unusually serious, which immediately set off alarm bells. They started by saying Emily was going through a rough patch, and then casually dropped that they were struggling to help her financially. That's when they asked if I could chip in. They framed it as a way to help the family, but I wasn't buying it. I reminded them that I had already sacrificed enough for Emily, from working extra shifts to help with her tuition to constantly being the one to compromise. This time, I wasn't going to bail her out. Predictably, my refusal didn't go over well. My parents accused me of being selfish and letting the family down. I ended the call before it could turn into another guilt trip. It wasn't worth arguing anymore. Emily, of course, took to social media. This time, her posts weren't just passive-aggressive, they were outright attacks. She wrote about how some people turn their backs on family when times get tough and how it's sad when success makes people lose their humanity. A few of her friends chimed in, agreeing with her posts, but it was clear from the comments that most people weren't buying it. Some even called her out, pointing out that she wasn't exactly known for being selfless herself. Meanwhile, my extended family was starting to see Emily for who she really was. A couple of uncles and a few cousins reached out to me directly, expressing their disappointment in her behavior. One cousin told me about how Emily had once ruined her engagement party by making a big scene, and another shared a story about Emily borrowing money and conveniently forgetting to pay it back. It seemed like everyone had a story about Emily, and now that the spotlight was on her, people weren't holding back. As if that wasn't enough, Emily found a new way to stir the pot. She started threatening to show up uninvited to my wedding. Travis and I didn't want to take any chances, so we hired security and made sure the staff knew to keep an eye out for her. We even had to inform our vendors, just in case she tried to pull another stunt like before. It felt extreme, but after everything she'd done, we weren't taking any risks. While all of this was happening, my career continued to flourish. I was assigned to lead a major project at work, a milestone that felt like the culmination of years of hard work. The recognition was a huge confidence boost, but I knew better than to share the news with my family. Somehow, Emily still found out. She dismissed it as just another lucky break, which was almost laughable at this point. Her jealousy was becoming more obvious by the day. A mutual acquaintance from college reached out around this time and gave me some unexpected insight into Emily's behavior. They mentioned how Emily had always felt inferior to me, but tried to cover it up with bravado. It explained a lot: her constant need to tear me down, her jealousy over my achievements, and her inability to take responsibility for her own failures. It didn't excuse her actions, but it did give me a clearer picture of what was driving them. Then, out of the blue, Emily sent me a text. It was an apology, or at least it was meant to look like one. She said she was sorry for anything I might have done to upset you and hoped we could move forward. It was vague, insincere, and didn't address any of the actual issues. I didn't respond. At this point, I wasn't interested in half-hearted apologies. Around the same time, I decided to share my story on Reddit. It was mostly to vent, but the response was overwhelming. My post went viral, with thousands of people chiming in to offer support, share similar experiences, or simply call out the toxicity of the situation. It was validating in a way I hadn't expected. For once, it felt like people understood what I'd been dealing with. Of course, my parents got wind of the post. They called me, furious, accusing me of airing the family's dirty laundry. They still refused to acknowledge their role in the conflict, insisting that I was blowing things out of proportion. It was the same script they'd been using for years, and I was tired of hearing it. Despite the drama, I started noticing something important. Without the constant stress of trying to please my family, I felt lighter. My focus shifted to my career, my relationship with Travis, and the future we were building together. The contrast between my old life and my new one was stark, and it made me realize just how much I'd been holding myself back. As for Emily, her missteps seemed to be catching up with her, both personally and professionally. It felt like a storm was brewing, and I had a feeling the fallout was going to be significant. Update 3. The storm hit faster than I expected. Not long after Emily's vague apology text, I started hearing whispers that she had lost her job. It wasn't a total surprise given her work drama, but the details were brutal. Apparently, she'd clashed with multiple colleagues, ignored deadlines, and even tried to pin her mistakes on someone else. Her boss had finally had enough. The news traveled fast through the family, and before long, my parents were in full panic mode. Their next move was predictable. They called me, claiming Emily was in a desperate situation and needed my help. This time, they didn't even bother sugarcoating it. They outright asked me to lend her money. I stayed firm, reminding them that I'd already given more than my fair share in the past. I wasn't about to swoop in and save her from the consequences of her actions. When they realized I wasn't budging, they resorted to their favorite tactic: guilt. They accused me of abandoning the family during a crisis and claimed I was turning my back on blood. I ended the call before it could spiral further. The fallout for Emily wasn't limited to her job. Not long after, a former coworker shared a story online about Emily's unprofessional behavior. It wasn't hard to figure out who it was about. Everything matched perfectly, from the timing to the details. The post went semi-viral, and the comments were ruthless. People piled on, calling out entitlement and poor work ethics. Emily's social media presence disappeared almost overnight. She went from posting her usual curated selfies and inspirational quotes to complete radio silence. As all this unfolded, Travis and I were finalizing wedding plans. Despite everything, our day went off without a hitch. We'd taken every precaution to keep Emily out, from hiring security to ensuring our vendors knew the situation. It paid off. There wasn't so much as a whisper of drama. Surrounded by supportive friends and family, it felt like a fresh start, a moment to truly celebrate without the shadow of my family's dysfunction hanging over us. In the days after the wedding, things escalated further for my parents. More and more extended family members began distancing themselves, tired of the constant chaos surrounding Emily. One of my uncles even called out my parents directly, accusing them of enabling her behavior for years. It was a surprising shift. People who had previously stayed silent were finally speaking up. Around this time, an old family friend reached out to me. She'd seen some of the fallout online and wanted to share her perspective. She admitted she'd always noticed how my parents favored Emily and felt it was unfair. She also said she admired how I'd handled the situation, refusing to let them guilt me into cleaning up their mess. Her words carried weight not just for me, but for the relatives who overheard her at a family gathering. It was one of the first times I felt publicly validated in this whole ordeal. Meanwhile, Travis and I started the next chapter of our lives. We moved to a new city for his job, which gave us a chance to put some distance, literally and emotionally, from everything. Around the same time, I started therapy. It wasn't easy unpacking years of family dynamics, but it felt necessary. Through therapy, I began to understand just how much of my life had been shaped by trying to live up to impossible expectations while being overshadowed by Emily. Then, out of nowhere, Emily reached out again. This time, she wanted to meet in person. She framed it as wanting to reconcile and start fresh. I was skeptical, but agreed to a short meeting, making it clear that Travis would be there, and we'd be sticking to neutral topics. True to form, Emily couldn't help herself. Within minutes, the conversation turned into another round of blame shifting. She claimed she was only acting out because of the pressure I put on her by being the perfect sibling. It was so absurd, I didn't even know how to respond. Travis and I ended the meeting early, and I decided then and there that I was done. My parents weren't far behind with their demands. They called me, insisting that I reconcile with Emily for the sake of the family. When I explained what had happened during our meeting, they brushed it off, saying Emily was just stressed and needed more support. They completely ignored the years of mistreatment I'd endured and kept pushing the narrative that I was the one holding everything back. It was exhausting. That was the final straw. I made the decision to go completely no contact with Emily. As for my parents, I limited communication to occasional check-ins to keep things civil but distant. For the first time, I stopped worrying about how they would react or what they might say about me. Their approval no longer felt like something I needed. Emily's downfall wasn't just a single moment, it was the culmination of years of entitlement and poor decisions catching up with her. Watching it unfold from a distance, I realized just how much freer I felt without the constant burden of trying to fix a family dynamic that was never going to change. Travis and I are building something solid, something healthy, and I'm determined to keep moving forward without letting the past weigh me down. Update 4. It didn't take long after I went no contact with Emily for the next big revelation to hit. I woke up one morning to a flurry of texts from relatives about Emily being sued. Apparently, she'd been contracted to plan an event, a job she'd taken after losing her corporate role, but she'd botched it so badly that the client was now suing for breach of contract. They claimed she hadn't delivered on any of her promises, missed deadlines, and left them scrambling last minute. The lawsuit wasn't just a family rumor either. A cousin sent me a link to a local news site that had picked up the story. Emily's name wasn't mentioned, but it was clear to anyone who knew her. My parents were in full meltdown mode. Between Emily's legal troubles and their growing financial strain from constantly bailing her out, their stress levels were through the roof. My dad, who's always been a proud man, started canceling social events to avoid the inevitable questions about Emily. My mom, who'd been Emily's loudest defender, started calling me again, though this time her tone was more desperate. She even blamed me for their stress, saying my refusal to help the family had pushed Emily into this downward spiral. I let the calls go to voicemail. The extended family was losing patience too. More relatives cut ties with my parents and Emily, fed up with years of excuses and drama. One of my uncles, who'd been particularly supportive of my parents in the past, openly called them out at a family gathering. He told everyone that they'd enabled Emily for too long, and that it was about time she faced the consequences of her actions. Word of his speech spread quickly, and it seemed to cement the growing divide between my parents and the rest of the family. Around this time, my Reddit post started gaining even more traction. It reached a wider audience, with people sharing their own similar experiences and offering support. A few media outlets even reached out, asking if I'd be willing to do an interview. I politely declined. I wasn't interested in turning my family drama into a public spectacle, especially since it felt like things were already spiraling out of control for Emily. Meanwhile, therapy became a cornerstone of my new life. For the first time, I was unpacking years of resentment, guilt, and frustration. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. My therapist helped me see that I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn my parents' approval, even when it was clear they weren't willing to give it. Letting go of that need was freeing. When I thought about Emily now, I didn't feel anger anymore. If anything, I felt pity. Her life was a mess, but it was a mess of her own making. The isolation my parents faced continued to grow. Cousins stopped attending family dinners, uncles and aunts made excuses not to visit, and even old family friends started pulling back. My parents, once the center of every family gathering, were now mostly on their own. I heard through the grapevine that they'd begun leaning heavily on a couple of their remaining friends, but even those relationships seemed strained. Amid all this chaos, my career reached new heights. I was offered a leadership position at work, a role that not only came with a significant pay raise, but also allowed me to finally step into a space where I felt valued and respected. The timing couldn't have been better. Travis and I celebrated quietly, knowing how far we'd come in the past year. His unwavering support through all of this had been my rock, and I made sure he knew how much I appreciated him. Rumors about Emily's decline continued to surface. Someone mentioned she'd moved back in with my parents, struggling to rebuild her life. She was supposedly looking for work but hadn't landed anything stable. The idea of her being back under my parents' roof felt like a full circle moment. For years, they'd bent over backward to shield her from consequences, and now they were stuck cleaning up her messes. Publicly, I received an outpouring of support. People on Reddit and elsewhere shared how my story had inspired them to set boundaries in their own lives. It was surreal but also incredibly validating. For so long, I'd felt like I was shouting into the void, but now it felt like my voice was being heard. In a last-ditch effort, my parents reached out again. They begged me to come home for a family intervention. They framed it as a chance to heal old wounds, but I knew better. It was just another attempt to drag me back into their toxic cycle. I declined firmly, telling them I was done being the scapegoat. For the first time, I felt no hesitation in setting that boundary. As I look ahead, the future feels brighter than ever. Travis and I are settling into our new city. I'm thriving in my career, and I've started reconnecting with supportive relatives who've also distanced themselves from the drama. There's even talk of some exciting new opportunities on the horizon, ones I never would have pursued if I were still bogged down by my family's dysfunction. Whatever happens next, one thing is clear: I'm done looking back. The toxic cycle stops here. Update 5. The months after I went no contact with Emily and set boundaries with my parents were some of the most peaceful I've ever experienced. For the first time, there was no barrage of guilt-filled calls, no passive-aggressive messages, and no over-the-top drama sucking the air out of my day. Life became refreshingly quiet. Therapy continued to be a cornerstone in this new chapter. Through consistent sessions, I uncovered patterns in my family dynamics that I hadn't fully grasped before. My therapist helped me piece together how years of favoritism and emotional manipulation had shaped not just my relationships but my self-perception. One breakthrough came when I realized I wasn't responsible for fixing my family. That was never my job. Letting go of that burden made all the difference. Travis and I often found ourselves reflecting on our wedding. It had been perfect, not because of the decorations or the venue, but because of the people who showed up for us. Everyone who attended had been genuinely supportive, offering nothing but love and encouragement. In contrast, the absence of drama was striking. No one missed the tension that usually followed my parents or Emily. It was a day that felt like a true celebration, untainted by years of unresolved baggage. Meanwhile, Emily was attempting a comeback of her own. She reappeared online, trying to rebrand herself with motivational posts about new beginnings and learning from mistakes. It was clear she was fishing for validation, but the response was lukewarm at best. The comments were sparse, and even the likes seemed to come mostly from random accounts. The Emily who once thrived on attention was now struggling to rebuild her audience. After my parents' final plea for a family intervention and my firm refusal, they stopped reaching out altogether. For a while, I braced myself for another wave of guilt or manipulation, but it never came. Their silence spoke volumes. Without my willingness to engage, they seemed to have given up. It was a relief, though I occasionally wondered if they were biding their time for another attempt. One of the most unexpected developments came from my extended family. With Emily and my parents out of the picture, I began reconnecting with cousins and relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. It was surprising how many of them had distanced themselves from family gatherings because of the same dynamics I'd endured. Rebuilding those relationships felt like reclaiming a part of my life I hadn't realized I'd lost. Work continued to be a bright spot. A few months after my promotion, I received a major industry award for a project I'd led. The recognition was a career-defining moment and solidified my confidence in the path I'd chosen. My team celebrated with me, and Travis made sure we marked the occasion with a small dinner party at home. It was a quiet yet meaningful reminder of how far I'd come. Moving to a new city also opened doors to new friendships. Travis and I joined a local book club, which quickly became a weekly highlight. Through it, we met people who shared our interests and values, and it felt good to be building a community entirely separate from the drama of my past. Out of the blue, Emily reached out again, this time via email. Unlike her previous attempts, this message had a different tone. She apologized, and for once it felt sincere. She acknowledged the pain she'd caused and admitted to mistakes without deflecting blame. It was the kind of message I'd wanted for years. But by the time it arrived, it didn't carry the weight it once might have. I decided not to respond. Forgiveness didn't require re-engagement, and I wasn't willing to risk reopening that chapter of my life. Not long after, I received a letter from my parents. It was a mix of apology and justification. They admitted they'd made mistakes but blamed their behavior on the stress of raising two children with different needs. It read more like an excuse than a true apology. I didn't reply. By then, my focus was firmly on moving forward. My story continued to resonate online. The original Reddit post had sparked a wave of similar stories from others who'd faced toxic family dynamics. Some even messaged me privately, thanking me for sharing my experience. It felt good to know my journey had helped others find the courage to set boundaries in their own lives. Surprisingly, I was approached by a small publishing house interested in turning my story into a memoir. The idea of putting everything into a book felt daunting but exciting. While I haven't made any decisions yet, the possibility of sharing my journey on a larger scale is something I'm considering. Looking back, the growth I've experienced is undeniable. The anger, frustration, and guilt that once defined my interactions with my family have been replaced by clarity and peace. Travis and I are building a life rooted in mutual respect and love, and the people around us reflect those values. For the first time, I feel like I'm living authentically, unshackled by expectations I could never meet and free to focus on what truly matters. As for Emily and my parents, I wish them well from a distance. Rebuilding their lives is up to them now, not me. My energy is better spent on the people and opportunities that enrich my life. Wherever this journey leads next, one thing is certain: I'm not looking back.